There's a significant generational shift taking place in the workforce, and it's stirring up emotion in a lot of people, often in ways that we don't fully understand. I know some of you watching are a part of Generation Z, and that's great because the world we're going to talk about today is a world that you will soon be entering. So the launching pad today is millennials in the workplace. But it's actually about something much deeper than that. So we're going to start out talking about two things we know to be true about organizations. And then as we wrap up, we're going to talk about two things we know to be true about people and how to navigate a way forward. So the first thing we know to be true about organizations is that they were created to achieve a purpose. The second thing we know to be true about organizations is that they're made of people. People work in them. Therefore, people carry a piece of the purpose inside of themselves. Now, this may be because they need compensation, because they want to both live and play, or perhaps they're just very much in alignment with the overall purpose of the organization. Many of the organizations that are around today were built by the traditionalists. Then the baby boomers came on the scene, and they were very large in number, so they shaped much of the values and beliefs of these organizations. Then Gen X arrived. They were smaller in number, but they did manage to make some changes around flexibility in the workplace. But overall, they complied and eventually came to run some of these organizations, as well as establish some of the systems that exist in these organizations. With the recent recession, the boomers are sticking around the workforce longer than expected. So what we have is this status quo that has been maintained for a really long time. In fact, in some organizations, this status quo has been maintained for more than half a century. And one thing that we know for sure, but the thing that a lot of people don't want to talk about, is that change is happening. And while this change is somewhat dramatic, it's also very natural. And while the purpose of organizations is staying the same, the millennials are bringing with them different ways that they approach work. And it's quite different than the generations before. And so the values and beliefs that have been established are now being threatened, which makes this not just change, but revolutionary change. Sometimes when we go through this kind of change, we can take it personally. And the very thought of this type of change can threaten our own sense of values and our own sense of purpose. So how do organizations move into this change but continue in their purpose to actualize their intent in this revolutionary space? So let me pause for just a second and let's talk about the generations. Historically, when we think about the generations, we think of a 20-year period of birth dates. But generations are actually defined by much more than that. Okay? We have shared events and experiences that help define the way we view and interact with the world. For example, the traditionalists grew up during World War II. The boomers grew up during Vietnam and the Civil Rights Movement. Gen X sat in their school classroom and watched as the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up before their very eyes, and the first teacher in space perished. Millennials were profoundly impacted by 9/11. So now if we shift just a little bit to another way to look at the generations, let's look at how we think about food and what we do with food. The traditionalists, they were all about Sunday dinner. Boomers had their TV dinner. Yes, people actually ate this. Gen X grew up on carryout. I can't tell you how many chicken nuggets I ate as a kid. And millennials are all about fresh, organic, home-delivered meals. So how do these experiences and these events shape us in different ways? This is a framework we've come up with to help us understand this a little bit better. So the x-axis is about our power center, or our locus of control. So if we have an internal power center, that means I believe I can create change and I can control the outcomes of my decisions. If we have an external power center, that means we believe external factors control change and that change happens to me. The y-axis is about our orientation. If we're oriented towards the collective, that means the goals of the group supersede the goals of the individual. If we're oriented towards the individual, that means the goals of the individual take priority over the goals of the group. And actually, self-sufficiency ensures the survival of the group. Now, when we place the 4 generations into the framework, this is where they land. I'm going to quickly cover 2 characteristics of the 4 generations as it applies here. The first one is communication. Traditionalists are very direct in their communication. Boomers are much more nuanced and political. Gen Xers are very real. They want to be aligned internally. And millennials are pretty indirect in the way they communicate. Now, when we think about these 4 generations in terms of how they view organizations, traditionalists believe organizations are for the people. Boomers believe they're by the people. Gen Xers believe that organizations fail the people. And millennials believe that organizations are the people. Let's focus in on the millennials just a little bit more as we think about the changes that have occurred over these 4 generations. A recent survey by Zipcar states that 65% of millennials feel that losing their phone or their computer would be more detrimental to their day-to-day life than losing their car. Pew Research Center just did a study, and they found that the most common living situation for millennials, those between about 18 and 34, is living at home with their parents. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard stories about millennials in the workforce. I know I hear them all the time from people I work with. One of the most recent took place in downtown Chicago, and it was at this major accounting firm. And they had this 27-year-old millennial who had so much promise, and they wanted to really grow him up in the ranks. And so they put him on this special project team, and one of the senior partners was a part of this team with him. And so it's time for the first meeting, and everybody is sitting around this huge conference table, and they're overlooking the lake, except for the 27-year-old millennial. So his boss calls him up and says, "Hey, where are you?" The millennial says, "What do you mean, where am I? I'm down by the lake. I figured I'd just call in." Now, if you're from one of these 3 older generations, you might be feeling a little frustrated. Maybe there's even some anger. Perhaps you just feel flat out disrespected. But if you're the millennial, you're thinking, well, it's a beautiful day. I can use my phone. Why would I go in? And I guarantee you the millennial didn't wake up that morning going, you know what? I hope I do something today that really makes my boss feel disrespected. In fact, I hope I even get fired from my job. See, we're very divided. And to make matters worse, Gallup recently reported that millennial job turnover is costing the U.S. economy over $30 billion every year. So we've all had different experiences, and this changes how we view the world and the workplace. So what do? The natural thing for humans to do when they feel threatened or the status quo is being questioned is to either defer to the new power, which is enabling, or to mitigate the new power base, which is isolating. When we feel threatened, we don't do balance really well. Enabling looks like overemphasizing the individual above and beyond the purpose of the organization in hopes of pleasing and appeasing the workforce into staying. So just because you have a member of a certain generation that has a need or a want doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea. For example, if your new millennial employee requests the first 5 Fridays off so that they can return as an alumni to their college football games, that may not be a precedent that you want to set. Isolating looks like reducing the value of the individual and overemphasizing the value of the organization. The employee now becomes a means to an end, and they're irrelevant to the organizational purpose beyond their immediate use. So just because an organization doesn't understand the needs and desires of a generation doesn't mean they don't have value. One of the biggest complaints I hear from millennials right now is they won't let me get up from my desk. I have to stay at my desk all day. I would say perhaps it's time to consider the fact that not everybody is made for a desk job. So organizations have to avoid these two extremes. And rather, we need to build bridges and act in alignment with what the purpose is. We have to have integrity. Integrity looks like promoting we through expectations, leader behaviors, and lived values. Right? So our behaviors and our values have to match. And this collaborative relationship builds up the individual within the context of the whole and draws them into a purpose beyond pleasure or just trying to find happiness in the workplace. So for example, we all need a sense of belonging. We all need to feel respected where we work and connected. Enabling looks like leaders doing whatever they can to make employees happy. Isolating looks like leaders treating employees simply as resources. Integrity looks like leaders treating employees like people. They stay curious about others, rather than passing judgment and making assumptions about why on earth this millennial would even imagine it was okay to call in from the lake. Integrity gives us stability so that we're able to explore and engage and understand others from their vantage point. So 2 things we know to be true about people. The first is that classification, in this case, different generations, necessarily separates us. The less we know about each other, the less we care about each other. The second thing is, being curious and staying in relationship brings us together. So the more we know about others, the more we care about them. And then we're able to engage with each other in meaningful ways. Now, if we think about what it looks like to connect each person from each generation to the overall purpose of the organization, and for the organization to maintain integrity in its interactions with each of these people, this allows the organization to stay together and the people within to be different. So how do we manage this? We have to be comfortable in our own skin. Integrity has to be found not only within the individuals, but also within the organization. We also have to have space to be curious about each other. We have to be able to engage in ways that really matter. Now, some people will say, well, that sounds really easy. I promise you, this is not easy. In fact, just this week, I talked to somebody who was going through an entire reorg. They said the number one issue they had getting through this was the tension between the different generations. So this is incredibly difficult. But it's also one of the most meaningful things you can do throughout your life. Others will say, well, how is this going to keep the millennials from leaving my organization? I would say perhaps we're asking the wrong question. What if we turn that question around and said, are we building organizations with integrity and purpose that people want to be a part of while leveraging the strengths of the millennials along the way. So the challenge today is to build organizations that elevate everybody around the purpose while maintaining curiosity about each other. The choice of what we build is ours. Thank you.